Welcome back to Mighty Habits, everyone. I'm Steven, and we're so glad to have you back for another deep dive. We always try to pick these books that really challenge our thinking, and this week is no different.
It's a really interesting one this time.
It is. And to help me unpack all this, I'm joined by the fantastic Mary. Welcome to the show, Mary.
Thanks for having me, Stephen. Glad to be here.
I'm excited to dive into this one. So today we're tackling Die with Zero by Bill Perkins. And I know that title might sound, well, a little bit morbid.
Yeah, I can see how some people might get the wrong idea.
But trust me, it's not what you think.
It's actually quite the opposite. Diet with Zero is about really living life to the fullest.
Exactly. It's about uh, using your resources to experience everything you can while you still have the time and energy to enjoy it.
Right. Perkins argues that we should be focused on maximizing our experiences now rather than just saving and accumulating wealth for some distant future.
It's kind of like he's saying, don't wait until you're too old to enjoy your money to actually, start living.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. He introduces this idea of life energy as a resource.
Life energy.
Yeah. And he says it's just as important as financial capital, maybe even more so.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this life energy concept.
Well, think of it this way. Your ability to enjoy things, travel, connect with people, try new things, that all takes energy. And that energy, it diminishes over time.
Makes sense. I mean, you can't just earn more energy like you can with money.
Right.
No.
You only have a limited amount. So Perkins' argument is that while we're busy saving for retirement, we might actually be missing out on the best time to really experience life.
That's a really interesting point. It kind of makes you question whether our traditional way of thinking about saving in retirement is actually setting us up for, well, maybe some regrets down the road.
Exactly. Like imagine getting to your 80s with a ton of money in the bank, but wishing you'd taken that dream trip or spent more time with your loved ones when you have the health and energy to really enjoy it.
Yeah, that's a powerful image. So, is Perkins suggesting we just throw caution to the wind and blow all our money on fancy vacations?
Not exactly. He's not advocating for reckless spending. It's about finding a balance, right, between enjoying the present and making sure you're prepared for the future.
So how do we find that balance? Does he have like a formula or something?
He talks about this idea of the life energy timeline.
Okay, a timeline. And what exactly is that?
It's like a way of mapping out how your energy and ability to enjoy different things, it changes over time.
So like in your 20s and 30s, you might have the energy for, I don't know, backpacking through Europe or starting a business.
Right. But then as you get older, you might want to focus on different types of experiences, like maybe a relaxing cruise, mentoring young people, or finally writing that book you've always dreamed of.
So basically, the life energy timeline helps you make the most of each stage of your life by like tailoring your experiences to your energy levels and interests at that time.
Exactly. And it's not just about big adventures either. It can also be about those smaller everyday things that bring you joy.
Like spending time with friends, learning a new skill, enjoying nature.
Yeah, those things are important too.
Hmm, this is giving me a lot to think about. Our culture really emphasizes delaying gratification, saving for the future and all that. But Perkins is kind of turning that on its head.
Yeah, he's really challenging that mindset. It's a pretty radical idea when you think about it.
It is. And it makes you wonder, are we actually sacrificing our happiness in the present for a future that, well, we might not even get to enjoy the way we think we will?
Right. It's a question we all have to grapple with.
And I think that's one of the things that makes Die with Zero such a thought-provoking book. It forces us to really examine our priorities and ask ourselves, what are we working towards and what kind of life do we want to create?
It's a big question for sure.
It is. But I think it's an important one to ask.
Absolutely. And Perkins gives us some really interesting tools and strategies to help us figure out those answers.
So he doesn't just leave us hanging with these existential questions. He actually offers some practical guidance.
Right, he does. And that's what we'll be diving into in the next part of our deep dive.
This is fascinating stuff, Mary.
Oh.
I'm already feeling inspired to take a closer look at my own life and see if there are any changes I can make.
That's great to hear, Steve. And I think that's the whole point of this book, right? To get us thinking differently about how we live our lives.
It certainly is. And I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear more about those practical strategies you mentioned. So we'll be back in just a moment to continue our deep dive into Die with Zero.
I think one of the most powerful things about this book is that it reminds us that our time is, it's limited.
That's a good point. We often get so caught up in, planning for the future that we forget to actually enjoy the present.
Right. And Perkins really emphasizing that we need to make the most of the time we have now.
But let's be real for a second. Not everyone has the financial freedom to just drop everything and travel the world. How does this die with zero thing work for people who have, real world financial limitations?
That's a really important question, and Perkins actually addresses that in the book. He stresses that it's not about spending recklessly, it's about being intentional with the resources you have, both financial and, in terms of time.
So it's about making sure your spending aligns with your values, right?
Yeah.
Prioritizing experiences that are really meaningful to you, even if those experiences don't cost a lot of money.
Exactly. It's about realizing that fulfillment can come from all sorts of experiences, big or small. It could be a camping trip, volunteering in your community, learning a new skill, or even just, spending quality time with people you've been about.
So it's not just about like ticking off items on a bucket list. It's more about really savoring those moments and building those connections.
Right. And it's also about giving back. Perkins talks about the importance of generosity and using your resources to make a difference while you're still alive.
So whether it's supporting a cause, helping a friend, or leaving a legacy, giving back is like another way to invest your life energy.
Absolutely. It's about making a positive impact that goes beyond yourself.
Okay, so we've talked about the philosophy, but I'm curious about the practical side. How do we actually put this into practice? I mean, he talks about creating this life energy timeline, but how do we actually, build one?
Well, the first step is to really think about what's important to you. What brings you joy? What are your dreams? What kind of impact do you want to have?
So it's like taking inventory of your passions and priorities, but then how do we, factor in the reality of our financial limitations?
That's where some creativity comes in. It might mean making some adjustments to your lifestyle or spending habits to free up resources for those experiences that matter most. Maybe you downsize your home or cut back on unnecessary expenses.
So it's about making those conscious trade-offs to prioritize the things that really align with your values, investing in experiences instead of just accumulating, stuff.
Exactly. And remember, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can start small. Maybe you take a shorter vacation instead of a longer one, or you find a free way to enjoy a hobby.
The key is to start taking steps in the right direction, right? Moving away from that scarcity mindset towards a more abundant way of thinking.
That's a great way to put it.
But I think it's important to acknowledge that it can be tough to shift your mindset. We're so used to the traditional way of thinking about money and retirement.
It's definitely a challenge. It can be scary to step outside of your comfort zone.
There might be some fear, uncertainty, even guilt associated with, prioritizing experiences over saving every last penny.
Right. It's like we've been conditioned to believe that enjoying the present is somehow, irresponsible.
Exactly. And Perkins is really challenging that belief. He's saying that by denying ourselves those fulfilling experiences now, we might actually be setting ourselves up for regret later on.
And I think that's a really important point.
This is making me think about the concept of sunk costs in economics. We often hold on to investments or decisions even when they're no longer serving us just because we've already put so much into them.
Oh, that's a really good analogy. I think that definitely applies to our financial habits. We can get so caught up in building this huge nest egg that we forget to actually live and enjoy the journey along the way.
We're so focused on reaching the destination that we forget to, appreciate the scenery along the way.
Right. And Perkins is urging us to slow down, to savor the present moment, to really make the most of the time and resources we have.
This has been such a thought-provoking conversation so far, Mary. I know our listeners are eager to hear more about, the practical side of this. What are some specific steps people can take to start putting these ideas into action in their own lives? So we've talked a lot about the big ideas in Die with Zero, this whole shift in mindset. But I think our listeners are ready for some actionable advice. Where do we even start with, actually putting all this into practice?
Well, I think the first step is pretty simple, but it's something a lot of people skip over. It's about getting a really clear picture of your finances.
So back to basics with budgeting.
Exactly. Take a close look at your income, your expenses, your assets, any debts you have. That gives you a solid starting point.
Makes sense. So what comes after that?
Well, once you've got a handle on your finances, you can start thinking about your time horizon. How many years do you realistically have to enjoy those experiences on your, life energy timeline?
It's like a reminder that time is, it's a finite resource.
It is. And that leads us to the fun part, actually creating that life energy timeline. Start brainstorming. What are those big dreams you have? The adventures, the skills you want to learn, the relationships you want to nurture.
This is where we get to, yeah, like let our imaginations run
So
wild.
exactly. But then, of course, the question comes up, how do we actually afford all this?
Right. Money doesn't grow on trees.
And that's where smart financial planning comes in. It's not about, depriving yourself. It's about making smart choices with your money.
So maybe downsizing your home, driving a less expensive car, cutting back on those impulse purchases.
Right. It's about making sure your spending aligns with those things that are really important to you, those things that bring you joy.
And it's important to remember that, meaningful experiences don't have to break the bank. There's so much joy to be found in those simple pleasures, like spending time in nature or connecting with loved ones.
Absolutely.
This all sounds great, but I know some people are probably thinking, okay, but what about unexpected expenses? What about saving for retirement?
Those are all valid concerns. And, Perkins isn't saying we should throw caution to the wind. It's about finding that sweet spot between enjoying the present and planning for the future.
So it's not an all or nothing kind of thing.
Not at all. It's about creating a financial plan that lets you live a fulfilling life now while also making sure you're prepared for the future.
So it's about finding that balance that works for you.
Exactly. And it's an ongoing process. Your priorities might change over time, so it's important to reassess and adjust your plan as needed.
This has been a really eye-opening conversation, Mary. I feel like we've just scratched the surface of Die with Zero. It's definitely a book that challenges us to think differently about, well, about a lot of things.
I agree. It's a real call to action to, you know, stop delaying gratification and start living a life that's truly meaningful, a life that's rich with experiences and connections.
So for our listeners who are, ready to embrace this philosophy, what's one thing they can do today to get started?
I'd say ask yourself this question. If you knew you had a limited amount of time left, how would you live differently? What would you prioritize? What kind of impact would you want to make?
Those are some powerful questions. They really get you thinking about your values and what's truly important.
They do. And remember, you don't have to wait until you're retired or have $1 million in the bank to start living a fulfilling life. Start today.
That's a great message to end on. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive into Die with Zero, Mary. I hope it's inspired our listeners to, really think about their priorities and start living a life that's full of purpose and meaning.
Thanks for having me, Stephen. It's been a pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, be sure to subscribe to Mighty Habits for more deep dives into books that challenge our thinking and help us live better lives. We'll see you next time.